So the current outdoor temperature is negative 0.1. It was -6 when I woke up this morning. The chickens were all huddled around the heat lamps and didn't want anything to do with that wind today. So I figured since I've got to go out in it to deal with the chickens, I might as well test something. So I pulled out some of the shells that we loaded in the squirrel hunting video. This is number 5 lead shot, and the powder was Winchester WSF. Or hang on, did we use, it's unique, isn't it? Forgetting my own videos. But whether it was WSF or, it's gonna drive me crazy now, I gotta look it up. So yeah, these are the Winchester holes, so that was Winchester WSF. I just grabbed 5 rounds and sat them outside for a couple hours, and I had the gun out there for about 30 minutes. Just wanted to see if they would fire, make sure everything seemed okay. So number 1, the red dot sight is pretty close. Number 2, the red dot sight could probably use a battery. It got dim pretty quick, and I can't remember the last time I put a battery in that thing. But the shots all seem to go off okay. Except, did you notice the sound? Did you notice the difference in sound on the 3rd shot? Let me play it one more time. It wasn't anything crazy, but like as I was shooting, I thought it might have sounded a little bit funny. And then whenever I pulled the video off the camera, it sounds kind of funny there too. So what happened? Or did anything happen? Maybe I just hit something, something different downrange that made a funky sound. You know, I had earplugs in. Sometimes it's hard to tell where the sound's coming from. This ties into a question I've been getting, which is why am I bothering with roll crimps? Like, why don't I just use fold crimps or star crimps on everything? This is a very, very deep discussion. I'll start with the very most obvious and indisputable. It takes much less equipment to load a shell with a roll crimp. A roll crimper and a hand drill is what I used for this one. A roll crimper and a drill press is even better. But there's no reloading press. I would say the majority of people looking to load, whether it's tungsten or other field loads, hunting loads, like everybody's looking to load small quantities. Nobody's going to sit down and crank out 100 tungsten rounds for themselves. Like most places have a season bag limit of, 1, 2, 3 turkeys. How many shells do you need? It makes a lot of sense to just buy new holes. The primers are already in them and, they're new, so you don't have to worry about sizing. You just stuff your components in and roll crimp it. So another indisputable advantage of the roll crimps is their flexibility in hole length. Well, just like all of my practices over here, you can see there are all sorts of different lengths. It doesn't matter. And I guess over on the fold crimp side of things, there probably are presses and setups where you could have similar flexibility, but that's not common. Usually your press is set up to load 2 3/4, 3 inch, 3.5, whatever it is. And rather than adjusting the length of your shells, you add in filler so that your powder, wad, and shot column take up all of the space so that you get a good crimp. So let's say I'm putting together a tungsten load and I reach a point where I really need to add a 1/4 inch spacer, like a felt wad or cardboard wad. I can just cut the case a 1/4 inch shorter and go with that. So back to the cold ammo test. In a lot of the manuals, and I think maybe I could even say in the target shotgunning world, there are a lot of warnings about using slow burning powders. WSF is a medium, I think medium speed shot shell propellant. When you go slower than this into the long shots and the blue dots and the little guns and the whatevers, the slower burning stuff always seem to come with warnings in the manuals about not getting proper ignition. So for a slow burning powder to work properly, they say your wad needs to be seated very carefully and tightly against your powder. Your shot column and your crimps need to be perfect because the crimped shell is extremely important in getting proper ignition and developing the operating pressures of a normal shot. If you consider the case of the rifle cartridge, where we have a brass case and plus we have a bullet that's interacting with rifling that gives us a much more controlled environment to create our pressures and get our ignition going and get the powder burn we expect and all of that stuff. Because if you've never like poured out some smokeless powder and just lit it on fire, it burns slowly. Things don't get volatile until pressure starts getting involved. So in the case of the shot shell, if you imagine one that has a really poor crimp, crap's in there loose, maybe the wad's really not seated on the powder. If that shell is loaded with really slow powders, they're more likely to have problems getting the combustion process going and up to operating pressure. So loose, poorly crimped shotgun shells can have ignition problems, and it's made worse by the slow powders that are harder to ignite. I think that summarizes kind of the picture I'm getting from the manuals and stuff I've read. So now if we consider the case of the folded crimp versus the roll crimp, in the case of the roll crimp, every single shell I put together gets its own customized crimp. They're going to be roll crimped by hand, and slight differences between filler wads or whatever. Any problem in there that makes minor differences between your shot and wad column won't necessarily cause a loose crimp. In that same situation, with a fold crimp, the system is going to expect them to all be the same, and maybe you have some, like this one right here, it's kind of a little bit concave there at the top. It's like, yeah, there's one or two more BBs in there than it strictly wanted to have. See a little bit of an opening there in the center. It's another sign that the shot column was a little bit high. And here's another one from exact same batch, where I don't think this is too low. There's not much to pick on here. This one's kind of perfect. Here we go. So just like I was saying, where these didn't meet in the middle, meaning it was probably a little bit too tall. In the case of this one, I got a little bit of a swirl. So there was some excess material in the middle, which means that the column in this one was a little bit low. Now, I haven't used the fold crimp on the mech press yet. These were loaded with the Lee Load-All, and out of these 3 crimps we're talking about, I feel good about all of them. So even the fold process was able to compensate a little bit. They all have a little bit of shot movement whenever I shake them, but none seem particularly worse than the others. So is that an advantage for a roll crimp? So if these are roll crimped, maybe it's a little bit more consistent, and the length of each round might be slightly different depending on what that one needed. All this seems, I think this is all, well, I don't know. I want to test it. We're to a point where I'm extremely eager to load and shoot some shells. So I had a little minor technical difficulty. I thought I lost some video files, but everything ended up being okay. But a couple hours have passed and the temperature is all the way up to 0.3 degrees now. Well, now it's 0.1. It's still positive. This is a positive video. I went ahead and edited the video up to this point, and you might have noticed an unusual number of notes that I added, text on the screen and that sort of stuff. And I've got a whole page full of other crap. What it boils down to is that this is the heart of the whole discussion. I'm excited to start testing because I want to experience myself the difference between fold crimps and roll crimps. I think we'll go ahead and load these tomorrow. My plan is to start with the new Fiocchi hulls. I want to load some with a 6-fold crimp. I want to load some with an 8-fold crimp, and I want to load some with a roll crimp. And then I want to go test those rounds for velocity. If what I've read is true, the velocity and the pressure should be a little bit lower with the roll crimp versus the fold crimps. So I want to find a nice generic load and just load it in all of the scenarios I can think of. We'll shoot them all over the chronograph and see what we can find out. Another thing I want to do, I mentioned a little bit in yesterday's video that these are skived hulls, which, they've got a little bit of a taper right here at the case mouth. I meant to ask, you guys for your opinions on hull skiving, but I've done a little bit of research today. And I think I kind of get what's going on. For fold crimps, especially 8-point fold crimps, like these right here, the skiving really, really helps. It's hard to get this started and completed on an unskived hull. 6 points are apparently a little bit easier, but still most people recommend buying skived hulls. Now with the roll crimp, I read a lot of people that thought they got a better crimp with an unskived hull, which is mainly what I've been testing with, because you take a fired hull, cut off the old crimp, and now you've got a shorter unskived hull. So I think I'm going to try to pick a load that I can fit into these holes both at 2 3/4 inches and also at 3 inches. So on top of testing the fold crimps, I want to test a roll crimp with the factory skived shell and also cut one off and do it with an unskived portion. At least that's the plan. That's the plan I've got in my head right now. We'll see tomorrow. That's probably what we'll do, is load those tomorrow, which you guys are seeing this on Christmas Eve, so that'll be the Christmas video. Let me start going down this list and see if I can. So the warnings about using slow burning powders that I was talking about, how all the manuals just really seem to push people toward faster powders. A lot of that has to do with your shot weight as well. If you're planning to shoot 7/8 ounce target loads in 12 gauge, you don't want to be shooting long shot. Even if load data is probably out there somewhere for some appropriate wad, it's a bad choice. So I get where the manuals are coming from, but with heavy Magnum stuff, like if we go for full power TSS loads with 2 ounces plus in a 12 gauge, we're absolutely going to need those slow powders. And also that massive shot payload is going to help with these ignition worries as well. It's all a little bit confusing. And it's made even more confusing because some of my plans with TSS are a light 12 gauge, where if I just want to duplicate the terminal performance of a standard 2 ounce lead load, I might be able to get away with a 1 ounce or a 1 1/4 ounce TSS load. So in that case, we're going to be looking for faster powders than most of the TSS data that's out there probably. Same deal with 410. The heavy turkey Magnum loadings, it'll be Lil Gun and H110 and those slow powders. But if I want to do a squirrel load that's maybe 1/4 of an ounce, we're going to need to go faster than what might kind of be normal in 410. And trying to do all of this and match powder performance and characteristics to the various loads I want to work on is going to be made a whole lot easier if I get some of this crimp testing out of the way first and we move forward with a lot of confidence in our crimps. Oh, and another reason I wanted to do the skived versus unskived is I did run across a guy claiming that he got more consistent velocity with unskived holes. So we'll see how all that goes. And I saw something hilarious, man. I didn't realize it, but our prep stations, like our reloading tools like this, the threading on these is the same as a freaking broadhead. So I saw a guy had installed an old broadhead on his case prep center and was using this as a skiving tool. I mean, it looks like, what a genius. Absolute genius. Now, this is a good way to slice off a finger, but I think when we're getting our holes prepped in the next video, we might give it a try. I saw another person said they used a large screw extractor, like an Easy Out. I don't have any of those laying around that are that big, but maybe you do. You could try and use it for skiving. I saw a comment that said everything is going to change whenever you introduce compressible components, because like all of this testing I was doing, this is all just full of shot. So once plastic wads, felt wads, paper wads, any of that stuff is in there and the column becomes compressible, then everything might change. It might be that all of my practice against this, hard stop has not really prepared me for what I'm going to run into with real shells. We'll find out tomorrow. Now, another thing in the pros and cons list for roll crimps and fold crimps, I guess you gotta talk about weather resistance. These overshot cards have some sort of a glossy coating on them, but I'm sure they wouldn't hold up very long. And I think there's waterproofing products. I believe that video I linked yesterday or the day before, they used nail polish. I'm not too freaked out about that. That might be a huge deal for waterfowl folks. I don't know. Now, because roll crimping is what I've been working on, I just want to make it clear, like, I'm not committed to roll crimping whatsoever. If testing shows that the fold crimps are performing better, then that's what I'm going to load. It's just a skill that I feel like I definitely need to know, and it seems to match what I'm trying to do. I look around, most folks doing this are roll crimping. Someone had mentioned that they were able to roll crimp the Remington holes with the taper. Now, this one that I tried, I'd cut it pretty short. I think this is a little bit short of the 2-inch mark. So maybe if I tried cutting one a little bit longer, it would work okay. I'll give that a shot. Or especially like if you were starting with 3 inches and cutting down from there, I could see avoiding that thicker plastic So we'll give that another shot someday. So the last thing I want to bring up again is the sound of those shots. For the time being, I'm gonna assume it was insignificant. And in the future, you know, we don't need sub-zero temperatures to test this. We can just throw these in the freezer and test it on a day with a little bit better weather. I wish I knew the velocity on those 5 shots I took. Before I call this done, I better check the comments of the last video one last time. So a couple things. First of all, the hole trimming topic, or I should say there are hole cutters, but there are also trimmers, I guess. And some of the problems I was having, like, you know, these were just what I had laying around. I've got 10 minutes in making these, and it's really just to hold me off until I figure out which one I want to 3D print. There's a couple 3D printed designs where, you know, it holds a razor blade and has guides and stuff. So I'm not too worried about that, but I might look into seeing if there's a design meant more for trimming than cutting, because the cutting was fine with these, and then if I could just clean it up, square it off, that's all I would really need. And a couple people mentioned how dangerous my cutting technique looked with the thumb here. This comes from half a lifetime of stripping cables to install connectors. Like, there's no, like, I don't know. It's not safe. You shouldn't do it. But it wasn't quite as scary as it looked. So last thing here, I promise. So the roll crimper I've got, somebody had mentioned that they looked a lot more square, like they're kind of squared off when compared to some of the other crimpers on the market. And I'm pretty sure it was Fortune Cookie 45LC, one of his videos. He was doing a comparison that included this crimper, or there we go, this one. And that's what that's all about. I don't think that is related to technique. I think it is completely related to the shape of this tool. Some of the others are more rounded, and this one is just a little bit severe with its sharp shoulder. I think for the time being, I'm good to go here with this one. I'll probably upgrade at some point, but I've got it to a point where I'm happy enough. So we'll just roll with that for a while. That's it for today. See you guys tomorrow.